Okay, today on the show, I have got a special guest, a completely different guest than what we're normally, who we're normally interviewing. This man is not a movie star that I know of. He's not a sportsman, but he is a professor in Harvard. Mr. Avi Loeb, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thank you. I'm not allowed to comment on what you just said, but there was actually a filmmaker following me in a recent event in Washington, D.C. that I attended 2 weeks ago.
Okay, so that's a secret project.
As of now, yes.
Okay, okay. So this man is a future movie star potentially.
No comment.
No comment. Okay, so you were born in Israel and then you moved to America. Did you always plan on moving to America to study, or how did you end up going there?
Not at all. My life is pretty much a result of circumstances. I was born on a farm and collected eggs every afternoon, so you can treat me as a farm boy.
Yeah,
Uh,
they're big in Ireland. We've lots of farmers here. It's our
yeah, and
culture.
actually, I should say Ireland is the favorite country in the world for my wife. She actually is writing a book about it. And as a child, I was mostly interested in philosophy and the big questions, and not at all in science. And then in Israel, you have to serve in the military at age 18, and so I was recruited to a program that allowed me to finish my PhD at age 24 instead of running in the fields. I preferred to do that, and that led me into physics. And then I established a project that was supported by the US that brought me to visit the US, and then I was offered a position at Princeton under the condition that I'll switch to astrophysics. And after that, I received a tenure appointment at Harvard, the professorship. And at that point, it became clear to me that, uh, I'm actually married to my true love, even though it was an arranged marriage, because in astrophysics, you have fundamental questions that used to belong to philosophy, and you can address them with a scientific method. Now, I should say that the most vivid memory I have from my childhood was sitting at dinner and asking a difficult question. And the adults in the room would, in the good case, basically pretend that they know the answer. In the worst case, they would dismiss the question simply because they didn't know the answer. And I thought that by becoming a scientist, I can maintain my childhood curiosity and be surrounded by like-minded people. To my surprise, I mean, I was able to follow my curiosity, and that's what I'm doing right now. But I'm not always surrounded by like-minded people, in the sense that many people in science pretend that they are the adults in the room and therefore dismiss a question to which they don't have an answer.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit about that later with what went on in 2017 and the different beliefs from people around that. But at the moment, your day-to-day life, what does that entail?
Well, it entails waking up at 5 a.m. in the morning and jogging for half an hour in the company of ducks, rabbits, wild turkeys, and birds. I enjoy nature because I was born on a farm, and I'm very connected to nature, much more so than to people. I have no footprint on social media. I don't care how many likes I get on Twitter. That's not relevant. What I really try to figure out is nature, understanding the reality that we live in. And after jogging in the morning, I go through my email. I usually do creative work. I write essays. Over the past couple of months, just to give you a sense, I wrote 22 essays. And I also write scientific papers in collaboration with my students, postdocs, and so forth. And I write books as well. So about half a year ago, I published my book, Extraterrestrial, which became a bestseller. And since you were talking about movies and so forth, I had about 30 requests from filmmakers and producers to make a film about my book over the past year or so. I had about 1,250 interviews for podcasts and all kinds of other outlets and newspapers, televisions, and so forth. And altogether, it was an amazing experience to see how interested the public is. Now, about 10 days ago, I participated at an event in Washington, D.C. that was at the National Cathedral, together with the head of NASA, Bill Nelson, the director of national intelligence, Avril Haines, Jeff Bezos, the head of Blue Origins, founder of Blue Origins, and a theologian from Durham University named David Wilkinson. And it was a very interesting discussion, mostly about the possibility that objects near Earth may have originated from an extraterrestrial technological civilization, which is the latest subject that my book focuses on and that I work on. And when the head of NASA and the director of national intelligence were asked about the most exciting project in their organizations, they said it's classified. But I was fortunate to represent a project called the Galileo Project, where I can say the most exciting aspects of it are not classified, and we can talk about them.
Yeah. So just when you touched on your book there for a minute and you were approached by various different people to make a film or documentary out of it, you said you got offers, but I take from what you're saying is you didn't accept any of them. Would that be fair?
No, I mean, I didn't decline all of them, let's put it this way.
Okay.
And I should say the book was translated to 25 languages. So altogether, there was a lot of enthusiasm from the general public. And that became clear when I went to Washington. That was the biggest, the first public event since the pandemic started that I attended outside of the Boston area. And as I left the taxi, as I opened the door and went out, someone approached me and said, "Are you Avi Loeb? Can I get a photograph with you?" And then when the event ended, there was a line of about 50 people standing up, waiting patiently to tell me how excited they are with the Galileo Project, how meaningful it is for them. And we can talk more about it, but this is a project that was established just a few months ago after a few very wealthy individuals, billionaires, visited the porch of my home. They were inspired by my book, Extraterrestrial, and within a few weeks, I had about $2 million that allowed me to establish the Galileo Project. And this project aims to study objects near Earth and figure out whether there are equipment that was sent into space by other civilizations, just like the spacecraft that we sent out in the form of Voyager and New Horizons, so forth. There are 5 of them that we sent out of the solar system. And so the Galileo Project has 2 branches. One is to look at unidentified aerial phenomena. These are objects that were mentioned in a report delivered by the Director of National Intelligence to Congress in the US on the 25th of June this year, talking about objects whose nature is unclear. And we want to get high-resolution images of these objects using telescope systems, including optical telescopes, infrared sensors, radio sensors, and audio sensors. So basically, doing it the scientific way, just like astronomers use telescopes to observe the sky, very distant sources. Here we are looking at very nearby sources. And the second branch of the Galileo Project is to look at objects that enter the solar system from outside, that are farther out, not just next to Earth, but within the orbit of the Earth around the Sun. The first such object was discovered in 2017, and it looked very weird. Didn't look like a comet or an asteroid, and it was given the name Oumuamua, which means in the Hawaiian language, a scout, because it was discovered by a telescope in Hawaii.
And could you explain to me the significance of the shape of that item?
Yeah, so this object, at first, astronomers thought it must be a rock that came from another star. Just like we have rocks in the solar system, these are the building blocks of the planets. And you have some leftover Lego pieces from the construction project of the planets in the solar system. Most of them are in the outskirts of the solar system, the so-called Oort cloud. And when a star passes by, it can dislodge some of them into interstellar space. And you can imagine the same thing elsewhere, around other stars. And so we expect some rocks to come to us from other stars, but mostly those should be comets, meaning that it's rocks covered with ice. So when it gets close to the sun, the ice evaporates and you end up with a cometary tail of dust and water vapor. That's what we see in comets that belong to the solar system. And this object didn't look like a comet. There was no evaporation around it, no dust or water vapor or anything. So it was definitely not a comet of a type that we have seen before. So then people said, okay, maybe it's just a rock, bare rock. But then as the object was tumbling every 8 hours, the amount of sunlight reflected from it changed by a factor of 10. And that meant that it has a very extreme shape, most likely pancake-like, like a piece of paper tumbling in the wind. And then the object exhibited an excess push away from the sun. And that, I thought, can only be explained if it's as a result of the reflection of sunlight from it, because there was no evaporation of the object that would give it the rocket effect. And so in 2020, just a year ago, September 2020, there was another object that exhibited an excess push away from the sun by reflecting sunlight, no cometary tail. It was given the name 2020 SO. And then the astronomers that discovered it with the same telescope in Hawaii realized that it actually came from Earth. It's a rocket booster that was launched in 1966 as part of a lunar lander mission. And we know that it had thin walls, and that's why it was pushed by reflecting sunlight, no cometary tail, obviously. We know that it's artificial because we produced it. The question is, who produced Oumuamua?
Who do you believe produced it?
I don't know. We just need more evidence. And, part of the Galileo project is to design a camera on a spacecraft that will fly near a similar object to Oumuamua, the next one we find, and take a close-up photograph, because they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. In my case, a picture is worth 66,000 words, the number of words in my book. I wouldn't need to write a book if we had a picture of Oumuamua, close-up picture, so that we can see if it has bolts or screws on it, or it looks like a rock. And I would frankly, personally, if we do identify it as an artificial object, I would like to actually put my hands on it and press some buttons. If we do find an artificial object from another civilization, I would be thrilled, because it would be just like a kid in a candy store for me. I have the latest gadgets. I always enjoy the latest technology, but just imagine another civilization that is 1,000 years ahead of us, or maybe 1,000,000 years ahead of us. Most of the stars formed billions of years before the sun. So you can imagine someone that predated us, that produces technologies that belong to our future. And if we find them, we will learn a great deal about, how more advanced we could be.
Yeah. In terms of the Galileo project, then, with the cameras you need and things like that, obviously they're very expensive, are they?
Not very expensive. In fact, each telescope system that we are actually putting together right now will cost about 100, 200,000. So we could construct maybe 5 to 10 such copies of the first system that we assemble and distribute them in various locations. But the hope is to have hundreds of them. And for that, we will need about $100 million. And I have some interest from wealthy individuals, but we do need to raise those funds in order to accomplish the task. And I should say that's not a lot compared to other scientific projects. Just to give you an example, the Large Hadron Collider in CERN cost about $10 billion. And we haven't found new physics from it, except for realizing that ideas of the past are correct, like the Higgs was discovered, but we didn't find a new law of physics, a new particle as of yet, and we invested $10 billion. So, I mean, obviously, it's when you are at the frontier, you are searching in the dark. You're not sure what you will find. And but all I'm saying is that at 1% of the cost of the Large Hadron Collider, we can make a lot of progress on the question, are we the smartest kid on the block? Is there equipment flying near Earth that may represent another technological civilization? And, we just started that search when the Pan-STARRS telescope in Hawaii found this object, Oumuamua. Before that, before 2015, we couldn't have even searched for such a thing, the size of a football field reflecting sunlight. So we are only now having the instruments that allow us to search for it. And there is this joke about, or I should say, a tale about a fisherman that goes to sea and comes back and says, I discovered the new law of nature. All fish are bigger than 2 centimeters. So someone asks him, how big are the holes in your fishing net? And he said, 2 centimeters. So the way to think of this, in the past, we've used a fishing net that has huge holes in it. We couldn't have found an object like Oumuamua, and even smaller objects than a football field could not have been found. And so now we are starting the search in earnest. And there was never a team of scientists like we have in the Galileo Project. We have of over 100 scientists. There was never such a team constructing telescopes for the purpose of searching for objects from other civilizations near Earth. So it's very exciting.
Yeah, so a lot of this is down to kind of modern technology and how far we've come. So if we had come this far in technology 20 years ago, there would have been a lot more findings, do you think?
I think so. There is this poem by the famous poet Robert Frost, who lived not far from where I live, and it's about 2 roads in the woods that he took the road not taken, and that made all the difference for him. Now, for me, the road not taken offers a great advantage, because if nobody took that path, there might be low-hanging fruit that you can pick because nobody went there. And doing this scientific project for me is very exciting, because we might find things that are easy to find. Nobody took that path because it was ridiculed in the past. People think they know the answer in advance. But my point is, if you don't look through your windows and claim that you don't have neighbors, that will not get rid of your neighbors. And there is this Fermi paradox. Enrico Fermi, that used to, like 70 years ago at lunch, he was discussing the question of whether there are extraterrestrials with colleagues. And they said, well, it's very likely, like we say today, there are so many stars out there. Half of the stars, like the sun, have a planet the size of the Earth, roughly the same separation. So, it's huge numbers. Maybe there was, or there is. And he said, well, so where is everybody? Now, this is a very pretentious question, because it's just like saying, nobody is knocking on my door, therefore I don't have neighbors. Well, you should wait, because, recorded human history is just 10,000 years old. And that's 1/1,000,000th of the age of the Earth. So, it makes no sense for us to say, oh, nobody is in front of us right now, therefore, we don't have neighbors. Well, first of all, if you have a fishing net with very big holes, you will never catch any fish. And you need to use the best instrumentation. Fermi didn't have telescopes that we have today, didn't have instrumentations of the type that we have today. So he couldn't have seen anything. But the other thing is that we have to get active, engaged in the search. Because why would they have a party in our backyard? I mean, that's presumptuous to think that we are so important in the big scheme of things. But I think a sense of modesty is needed, because the play started 13.8 billion years ago in the Big Bang. We just came at the end, and we are not at the center of the stage. So it's not about us. How dare we think that we are the central players, the central actors? And we should check if there are other actors out there.
Yeah. Just on your book, The Extraterrestrial, when you released that, what was the general reaction to that like from the scientific community?
Oh, so the scientific community has a difficulty discussing this subject because the sentence that is often quoted from Carl Sagan is extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. But my point is, it's a circular argument. If you dismiss the possibility that an object like Oumuamua was equipment from another civilization, if you say it's a rock, I don't know what kind of a rock, it's a rock of a type that I've never seen before, which is pretty much what the scientific community says, because the suggestions that were made was maybe it's an iceberg made of pure hydrogen so that we can't see the hydrogen when it evaporates. And the problem with that is that such a rock, a hydrogen iceberg, would evaporate very quickly and would not survive the journey. So then there was a suggestion maybe it's a nitrogen iceberg, a chunk of frozen nitrogen that was chipped off the surface of a planet like Pluto. And the problem with that is there is not enough nitrogen. The budget, the mass budget of nitrogen does not allow for a large enough population of such objects. And then there was a suggestion maybe it's a cloud of dust particles, like a dust bunny, that by reflecting sunlight is being pushed. Well, the problem with that, when it gets close to the sun, if it's 100 times less dense than air, as suggested, it will not maintain its integrity. It will be heated by hundreds of degrees and will just evaporate. So all of these suggestions were of something that we've never seen before. And that reminds me of a caveman that finds a cell phone. And the caveman is used to playing with a rock all of his life and would say, okay, it's a rock of a type that I've never seen before. So if the caveman would throw it away, that would be the end of it. If you don't seek more evidence, that's the end of it. If you say, oh, Oumuamua is natural, I don't care what it is, but it's natural, then that's it. But if the caveman would press a button and record his voice or press another button and record his image, it will become clear that this cell phone is not a rock. And therefore, the key here is to be sufficiently intrigued by how unusual Oumuamua was, or by the behavior of these unidentified aerial phenomena that were reported by the government, by military personnel, you see, to be sufficiently intrigued to seek more evidence, to basically be guided by what we see through telescopes and through cameras. Because then it's just like pressing a button. And then we can figure out whether it's a rock or something else.
Was this in the Pentagon UAP report?
Yeah, so the UAP report was delivered to Congress by the Director of National Intelligence on the 25th of June this year. And a month later, I announced the Galileo Project.
Yeah.
And of course, it was inspired by it because a major branch of the Galileo Project is attempting to identify the nature of these UAP. And recently, a few weeks ago, there was an amendment that was proposed by Senator Gillibrand in the US Senate to establish an office in government, in the US government, that will collect all the data available on UAP and try to coordinate between the different sections of government. They don't speak to each other. And moreover, to establish an advisory board that will have 20 members. And 3 of those members will be selected by the head of NASA. 2 of the members will be selected by the president of the National Academies of Sciences. 2 of the members by the president of the National Academy of Engineering. And 3 of the members by the director of the Galileo Project, with whom you're speaking right now. So yes. The Galileo Project is recognized in Washington, D.C., even though I didn't do much lobbying. And this just shows you that the idea that we are pursuing makes sense. It makes sense to the public. That's why I got thousands of emails since July of people willing to offer their financial support, their expertise to the project. And that's why there was a long line of people waiting to speak with me after the Washington event. And it's also it also makes sense in Washington, D.C. to the politicians and the military personnel that witnessed unusual things. And so I think, given that the academic community is slow to respond to this challenge, it will. My hope is that within the coming months, it will also make sense to my fellow scientists, especially if we find evidence that is beyond a reasonable doubt.
I think that this story is kind of only beginning. Do you?
Yes, I think the best part is yet to come. And moreover, it's not science fiction, it's science. By the way, I was asked many times, actually in Washington, I sat next to the director of national intelligence, Avril Haines, in the audience. And at the time, we were looking, on stage was Jeff Bezos. And he said that he was inspired uh, with his space tourism initiative. He was inspired by his childhood seeing Star Trek.
Mhm.
And I whispered to Avril, I said, I never liked the science fiction. I never liked the Star Trek because it bothers me to see that the storyline violates the laws of physics. I cannot enjoy it. It makes no sense to me. And she said, I actually did enjoy Star Trek quite a bit as well, just like Jeff Bezos. We need to work on you, she said. But it's true that science fiction is not my cup of tea. I don't enjoy it. I like science and I enjoy fiction. But when you have a storyline that makes no sense, like people are traveling between stars during their lifetime, that makes no sense because, for light, it takes 4 years to travel to the nearest star to us. And any spacecraft we can imagine will travel, 1,000 times slower. So it will take 50,000 years to reach the nearest star. And it's very boring to embark on such a trip. I think it makes much more sense to send artificial intelligence systems that are, they could outsmart us. They are our technological kids, but they are much better equipped to survive for long journeys. We were selected by Darwinian evolution to stay on the surface of this rock that we call our home, Earth. We should send our technological kids, they will learn from experience through machine learning, just like our biological kids learn at a young age, everything. And then we can send them, as I call it, AI astronauts. Just instead of sending human astronauts, that makes very little sense to me. We should send AI astronauts. And if we can imagine doing that, someone else might have done it before us. And that's why we should check, the neighborhood, our backyard, to see if there are any AI astronauts out there that came from somewhere else. These are not biological creatures. These would be, they could be made of electronics.
So while we might see you on the big screen at some point, we're certainly not going to see you in a science fiction movie in the near future or anytime.
You will see science. You will see fiction becoming science. That's what I can promise you.
Yeah. Avi, it was an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for hosting me. It was a great pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.